Okay, the next item of business is debate on motion 18780 in the name of Craig Hoy on impact of accommodating asylum seekers on Scottish local government. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. I advise the Chamber that we are, as expected, quite tight for time, and I call on Craig Hoy to speak to and move the motion. Mr Hoy, up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This is a debate that some people in this Parliament do not want us to have. It is one which is politically heated, one where the Liberal left want to mischaracterise the views of others. It is a potentially uncomfortable debate for those in government and those who have recently been in government. It is a debate where our language needs to be carefully chosen. I recognise that and I respect that fact. But it is a debate that we cannot afford not to have for any longer. Because today there are over 6,000 asylum seekers in Scotland. Glasgow is housing more asylum seekers than any other council in the United Kingdom, a staggering 3,844 as of the end of June. That is 40% more than Birmingham. To be blunt but honest with the communities that we represent and that we serve, this cannot continue. The economic costs are considerable. £250 million a year to house asylum seekers in Scotland. £41,000 to house and support each and every one. Ignoring this problem will not make it go away. The protests that Mr Swinney condemned are not what any of us would like to see on Scotland's streets, but they are the product of the failure of politicians to address legitimate community concerns. And at the heart of this problem, not at this moment, at the heart of this problem are criminal gangs who bring in illegal immigrants into this country in small boats. In the year to June, nearly 90,000 asylum applications were made in the UK, and 50% of those arrived via irregular routes, the vast majority by boat, but others by lorry or shipping container. The First Minister and SNP ministers can no longer bury their head in the sand, because the negative effects of illegal immigration and the asylum hotels at the visible tip of that iceberg are very, very real. Now, during the course of the summer, I knocked on thousands of doors across Dumfriesshire, and time again, the issue of illegal immigration came up. It came up amongst the young, amongst the old, it came up amongst those living in small villages and in large towns. And it came up amongst those who are directly impacted by asylum hotels and those who have simply watched the small boats arriving on their televisions with an increasing sense of alarm. And the costs are not just financial. There are economic costs and there are social costs and there are opportunity costs too. Yes, we all want Scotland to be a welcome, open nation. I've had the privilege of living and working overseas. I know how important migration is for modern dynamic economies to attract global talent and in so doing create a country rich in diverse cultures and experience. But uncontrolled migration, or worse still, rampant illegal immigration, simply cannot be the sustained solution to any workforce challenge. And the SNP are playing a strange game of identity politics if they believe this to be true. As we see from Scottish local authorities, the financial burden on housing immigrants cannot be understated. In fact, SNP-run Glasgow has admitted as much itself. Susan Aitken says the debt-laden local authority faces a staggering £66 million overspend on homelessness. And now today, city chiefs fear a fresh influx of newly homeless refugees as the Home Office reduces the length of time people can stay in government accommodation. With Scotland having... I will give an intervention at that point.
Mr Kilcap-Stewart.
Thank you, Craig Hoy, for taking that intervention. And I welcome your measured tone that we have started this debate on. Language does indeed matter. However, does he recognise that it was in fact the last Conservative government that did deliberately put a hold on processing claims to allow people seeking asylum, and now that Labour have come into Westminster, they are processing those claims, and that has resulted in vast numbers being there, but then that has not been funded properly in order to enable people to move on in dignity. Does he recognise that?
Craig Hoy, and give you some of the time back.
I recognise that, and I also said at the outset that this was going to be an uncomfortable debate for parties that had recently been in government. I'm not apportioning blame to one party or another in respect of this, but where the SNP does have to recognise, but where the First Minister's chuntering away, but where the SNP has to recognise it has... I will give way to Mr Swinney.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Hoy for giving way. I think what Mr Hoy is doing in this debate is while he is tacitly acknowledging the failure of the Conservative government to properly manage the asylum regime over many, many years in office, he is bringing this debate to Parliament to politically exploit this issue in a most disgusting fashion. And it embodies where the Conservative Party has found itself these days now.
Craig Hoy.
We can always rely on John Swinney to lower the tone. Mr Swinney, I would say that coming to this Parliament to reflect the views of reasonable people, the legitimate views of reasonable people in a representative democracy, I think it is scurrilous, Mr Swinney, for you to throw around that kind of language.
Mr Hoy,
having a debate
through the chair, Mr Hoy.
Now, Mr Swinney is shaking his head, pretending none of this is to do with him, but it is quite clear that here in Scotland, having a more liberal homelessness rules than in England, that Scottish councils now fear that thousands of potential asylum seekers will come to Scotland, where they will have a right to be housed that does not exist in Scotland. That is a very real risk, and the Minister is well aware of that. The SNP's approach is, by Council's own admission, crippling. It's forcing them... No, I won't. I don't have time. It is forcing them to prioritise the needs of those from elsewhere when Scots struggle to get a roof over the head. At the outset, I said this debate would be uncomfortable for those in government and those who were recently in government. And that means us recognising that the policy of housing asylum seekers, many who are in reality illegal immigrants in hotels, was the wrong decision. I don't have time. I won't have time. It was a decision taken by the last Conservative government, but that was in the eye of the COVID storm. But now we have to admit it was the wrong policy, even if it was well-intentioned. But we also have to recognise that things have got much worse as a result of Labour's failure to tackle the mounting immigration crisis. Rather than stopping the boats, Keir Starmer and Labour have allowed their numbers to swell. They systematically took apart the deterrent schemes put in place by the last Conservative administration. And in the year to June, Labour presided over a 17% increase in asylum applications over the previous year. But beyond these numbers, the picture is even more alarming because of the SNP's open-door rhetoric, which is adding to the pressures. Deputy Presiding Officer, Scots are seeing their services undermined and their life chances blighted. In 2023, there were 40,685 applications for homelessness and 33,619 households were assessed as homeless or threatened with homelessness in Scotland. So across the country, people will be understandably concerned when they see priority given to those coming from overseas. Deputy Presiding Officer, housing asylum seekers in hotels is not the solution to this problem. Tackling the causes of illegal immigration and processing those who are seeking to come here at source is, in effect, the only way to fix it. As I said last week, the use of asylum hotels has changed our communities and, in their view, not for the better. 5 years after the emergency use of hotels during the pandemic, the numbers have soared. In August 2020, there were 188 asylum seekers housed in hotels and bed and breakfast in Scotland. Today, this figure stands at over 1,500. The last Conservative administration committed to end the use of hotels, but sadly, this Labour government have comprehensively failed to do so. It is, I don't have time. It is unfair and wrong. I don't have time. It is unfair and wrong that we are still spending millions of pounds every day providing hotels to asylum seekers and illegal immigrants.
You need to
the communities I understand want action. The communities I speak with, want action from their governments. They understand that Britain should be a place to live, to work, to flourish, to put down roots, but not a hotel for those who have entered the country illegally. This is not a debate that any of us relish, but it is one that our constituents, regardless of which party represent, want us to have, and I therefore move the motion in my name.
Thank you. I now call on Shirley-Ann Somerville to speak to and move Amendment 18780.3 up to 5 minutes. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, President Officer. I move the amendment in my name. Our words do matter here, and they matter to the communities that we serve and those who seek our protection. So my message is very, very clear. We must ensure Scotland continues to be a welcoming nation to those fleeing persecution, conflict or danger. The UK has a moral and international legal obligation to uphold the 1951 UN Refugee Convention and supporting 1967 Protocol. The UK was indeed a founding signatory to the Convention, which defines the term refugee and outlines the legal protection, rights and assistance that a refugee is entitled to receive. According to international law, everyone who satisfies that definition in the Convention is a refugee. Scotland has a long history of being a welcoming nation where refugees have been able to rebuild their lives. Successive generations of refugee communities have contributed to Scotland, to our economy and our society. We shouldn't now turn our backs on those who need our protection in response to those who do seek to cause division and fuel tensions. Presiding Officer, asylum is a reserved issue, and it is the UK Government which is responsible for asylum decision-making and the provision of asylum accommodation. The Scottish Government has repeatedly raised concerns about the impact of UK asylum policy on Scottish local authorities, devolved public services and people living in our communities. And as CoCab Stewart pointed out, it was the previous Conservative UK Government which introduced asylum hotels and caused a processing backlog in the UK asylum system. Over the past year, attempts by the current UK Government to speed up decision-making and clear that backlog has resulted in a larger than expected number of newly recognised refugees seeking support from local authorities. And the wording is important, Presiding Officer. It's newly recognised refugees that have gone through their process, not illegal immigrants or migrants. And that is where the danger is in the policies that we are seeing. So I'm disappointed that the UK Government hasn't been able to work with the Scottish Government and indeed councils on the pressures within the current system. That has been further exacerbated by the recent reversal of the time that people seeking asylum are given to move on from asylum accommodation after receiving a positive destination on their asylum claim, again, not an illegal asylum seeker, because newly recognised refugees are entitled to housing support and other benefits. But we've long argued that 28 days is not sufficient enough to enable them to make those arrangements. Indeed, that's a position also held by the British Red Cross. Of course, the UK Government's policy to restrict people seeking asylum from working can also make finding a job extremely difficult once a decision has been made. Now, the Scottish Government recognises that Glasgow City Council in particular has come under significant pressure as a result of UK Government decision-making, and I've repeatedly called on Home Office ministers to meet with me alongside Glasgow City Council. Indeed, in April, the Scottish Refugee Council invited me to attend a round table along with the Council and UK Government. And we were disappointed that UK Government ministers didn't join us, where we collectively discussed what within our own responsibilities could be done to tackle the pressure. Now, Presiding Officer, in face of Russian aggression, we stood up with the people of Ukraine, helping more than 28,000 people flee war. And that was across this chamber, Presiding Officer. I wonder what the difference is that makes some people think that we shouldn't support people who flee war and persecution and abuse when they come from other countries. And I'm quite happy to take an intervention from Craig Roy. Very briefly, Craig Hoy.
I thank the Minister for giving way. In the previous debate, many of our colleagues talked about what an independent Scotland would look like. If an independent Scotland had a similar problem of illegal immigration, how would this Minister tackle it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, every country needs an asylum policy, but what we wouldn't allow is a backlog of claims to build up, and what we wouldn't have is a system where we actually didn't allow migration into our country for when we did need people into our country as well, both responsible morally and economically, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, can I end by asking the Chamber to join with me today in rejecting the divisive, dehumanising rhetoric in favour of delivering our moral and legal duties of protection and building a strong, resilient community? And can I leave the Chamber with the words of Sabir Zazi, who from the Scottish Refugee Council, he himself, of course, is a refugee, but as he talks about refugees, he says, "To live in fear is not a choice, it's a condition forced upon them. And when we allow fear to shape our response, we don't become safer, we become smaller." Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Mark Griffin to speak to and move Amendment 18780.2 up to 4 minutes. Mr Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Conservatives have taken the opportunity today to bring a motion in front of Parliament that opens us up to the type of dangerous and divisive rhetoric which is weaponised by bad faith actors for political gain. Now, of course, Presiding Officer, they are absolutely entitled to raise the issue in the manner that they have, but it's clear that in doing so, it's at best an act of political amnesia or more likely, blatant hypocrisy on two fronts. Firstly, we can't forget which party is responsible, entirely responsible, for the huge increase in the use of hotels for asylum seekers. 14 years of a Conservative government in Westminster pushed our asylum system to the point of collapse. Tory party decisions meant thousands of people were stuck in limbo while the appeals system sank under the strain. This is the party that decided 400 hotels across the UK were to be used to house people. And this is the party that had no serious plan to address the growing backlog that they caused. And secondly, Presiding Officer, was it not this Conservative Party who just last week were complaining about the use of parliamentary time being dedicated to the situation of children suffering in Gaza? But today their business is about asylum and immigration policy, which is reserved. Like I said, Presiding Officer, political amnesia or hypocrisy, the public will decide. But while the Conservatives have created this crisis, the SNP government has entirely failed to address the wider housing crisis and funding crisis in local government. The SNP government's utter failure to build enough homes and to properly fund public services has caused the crisis, and an SNP-run Glasgow City Council has facilitated it. Briefly.
Minister, briefly.
Just very briefly, thank you for that. So we know that local authorities are not accommodating people seeking asylum. It is the Home Office that is entirely responsible. Would he join with us to call on the Westminster Government to properly fund local councils instead of paying private companies who are making profit out of peril?
Mark Griffin.
The Minister makes clear that the UK Government funds asylum seekers at the point where they are given leave to remain. That then, the responsibility to house those becomes a Scottish Government, a local government funding issue. And that is where the problem lies. We've got an SNP council in Glasgow which is blaming the record financial settlement from a UK government for their funding problems, completely ignoring the years and years of successive council tax freezes and successive cuts to their budgets from their parliamentary colleagues in this place. Sorry, with 4 minutes, I can't give more time away. And while bins go unemptied, potholes appear and Glaswegians are living on the streets, they quietly give massive payouts to departing officials. Now, this SNP government talks about welcome, but it doesn't back up that welcome with the financial decisions and long-term support needed to turn that welcome into action and not just words. It's only Labour that has taken the steps to fix the problem. Since the Labour government was elected in the UK, the number of asylum decisions has doubled and the backlog has fallen by 24% in just 12 months. A new independent body has been announced to speed up asylum appeals and ease pressure on the courts. That's the kind of delivery, that's the kind of leadership that was completely absent from any Conservative government for the last 14 years and absent from any contribution I've heard from the Conservative benches. But here in Scotland, after 18 years of SNP failure, a Labour government would prioritise restoring our roads, hospitals, schools and communities, ensuring that all Scots, new and old, are served well by their government, not used as a rhetorical device and forgotten when their political capital runs out. Presiding Officer, we must do better. Scottish Labour will work with everyone committed to delivering for our communities, and we will never allow division or dangerous political point scoring to detract from the real work needed to done in that area. And I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Mr Griffin. I now call Maggie Chapman again. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Chapman.
Thank you. We are here today debating asylum and migration, but let's be clear, this debate has been framed by dog whistles, distortions and dangerous rhetoric from the Conservatives and others. I will not stand by while human beings are dehumanised, scapegoated and treated as though they are less than. Because no one is illegal. What is illegal, what is shameful, is the stripping away of rights, the deliberate spreading of misinformation and the whipping up of hatred by politicians and parts of the media. They are fuelling the fire of racism and fascism in our communities. And this situation has been created by design. Not by those seeking safety, but by those who would rather manufacture enemies than face up to the real problems. The threat to our country arrives not in small boats. It arrives in private yachts and jets. The Conservatives come here with their hate-filled rhetoric, yet it was they who closed the routes to come here safely. They are the proud party of empire, but empire has consequences. You cannot invade over 170 countries, subjugate millions to colonial rule, then feign outrage when people seek safety, family and community in Britain. Our history matters. The illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003 destabilised an entire region. Without our greed for oil, many would never have been forced to flee in the first place. We bombed Libya and left it a failed state. British foreign policy continues to create the very displacement the Conservatives now cynically exploit for political gain. And cynicism runs deep. The decision to house asylum seekers in hotels was not about care or compassion. It was about lining the pockets of Tory donors during COVID, while stoking public resentment. It backfired. They lost in a landslide. But instead of learning, they doubled down, exploiting the most marginalised to divide society even further. And we see the consequences. In Falkirk, a brick was hurled through the window of a hotel housing asylum seekers. That's not mindless vandalism, that's intimidation, it's racism, and it was fuelled by the lies and hatred peddled in politics and the press. I've seen firsthand some of the toxicity at anti-migrant protests in Aberdeen and West Hill. Anti-migrant protests are not about safety, they are about hate, and hate kills. Scotland must choose another path. International law places on us legal obligation to provide sanctuary. But beyond that, there is a deeper moral duty, the duty to treat people with dignity, with compassion and with humanity. That means the right to work, the right to contribute, the right to live in communities, not warehoused in ghettos or trapped in hostile conditions. Asylum seekers are not a burden. They are our neighbours, our future colleagues, our friends. So let's be honest about the real issues. Small boats are not the problem. Refugees are not the problem. The problem is a grotesquely unequal economic system that privileges the wealthy elite while ordinary people, whether born here or newly arrived, struggle to make ends meet. The answers do not lie in violent racism or in scapegoating those who seek safety. The answers lie in solidarity, in dismantling inequality, in building a society where everyone belongs and everyone can flourish. So I say to the Conservatives, stop scapegoating the marginalised. Stop using asylum seekers as a distraction from your failures. Stop peddling the dangerous lie that migration is a threat. Scotland has a proud tradition of welcome. Let us honour that tradition, not just in words but in action, by treating asylum seekers with the dignity and respect every human being deserves, by ensuring they can live safely, securely and proudly as parts of our communities, by rejecting hate and choosing hope and love. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Jamie Green again up to 4 minutes. Mr Green.
Presiding Officer, I can say with a high degree of certainty that when the Tory Shadow Cabinet sat to discuss how it would use its precious party business time, the better nature in me would like to think there were voices around the table who wanted to talk about NHS waiting times, or educational standards, or the ferry scandal, or Scotland's mental health crisis. But somebody, and I suspect not an MSP, said, let's talk about asylum seekers. All 6,000 of them in Scotland. And I think deep down we all know why. We all saw the same poll last Friday, which is perhaps why half the Tory benches are empty right now. Now, the motion talks about unsustainable finances of our local councils. That is a valid thing to debate. It is true. Our local councils are in a perilous financial situation. They have been for years. What's that got to do with the housing of asylum seekers? COSLA tell us why they are in a perilous position. The council tax freezes over many years led to shortfalls in revenue. Councils are now having to do more with less. This year alone, we know that councils are plugging over £600 million black hole, and long-delayed reforms to our outdated council tax system, which were promised nearly 2 decades ago, are yet to materialise. The problem is, when I sat in the opposite benches, we didn't blame asylum seekers for the financial position of our councils. We actually blamed the Scottish Government. I wonder what's changed. We should not be deaf to people's concerns about immigration, and neither should we as a Parliament be afraid to debate it and talk about it. Yes, of course, people can't get a GP appointment or see their dentist. Yes, they struggle to get decent housing suitable for them and their children. Yes, they're seeing people wandering around their town centres with absolutely nothing to do and absolutely nowhere to go. And it's easy for political parties to blame that situation on those who can do nothing about it. The reason you can't get a GP appointment is because there aren't enough GPs. The reason you can't get a dentist appointment is because there aren't enough dentists. The reason you can't get a house is because there aren't enough affordable homes in Scotland. But all the while we have qualified doctors, dentists, entrepreneurs and engineers sitting in a Holiday Inn somewhere, living on £10 a week, waiting in a Home Office backlog, sometimes for years. A backlog that leaves skilled asylum seekers unable to work, unable to claim universal credit, and with nothing to do and no money to spend. That is the reality of asylum seekers in Scotland. So here's an idea. Instead of forcing them to so-called live off the state, why don't we let them stand on their own 2 feet? Why don't we let them take individual responsibility? Why don't we let them contribute to Scotland's economy? Why don't we let asylum seekers work? That's not a woke statement. It makes economic sense, because I vividly recall sitting on that front bench next to the well-respected Donald Cameron during a debate where we both agreed that merited genuine discussion with the then UK Tory government. Research tells us that if we allowed, in Scotland alone, asylum seekers to work after 6 months in the country, there would be £16 million of economic growth. Allow it from day one, that figure doubles. Allow it across the UK, and the gains are huge. More tax revenues, more money flowing back into the economy, and more people filling our skills gap. It just makes sense, Presiding Officer. Look, people's concerns about immigration are real. But the way to deal with the problem of thousands of people stuck in asylum hotels is not to shut the hotels. It's to clear the backlog. It's process their claims quickly. Now, the last UK government failed spectacularly to do so. And let me say this, if the new one doesn't succeed in this, let me tell you there would be more turquoise rosettes sitting in this chamber than blue ones next May. And we all know who the real winners are in that scenario. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Megan Gallagher to be followed by James Dornan. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This afternoon we have heard that local authorities are struggling to house the surging number of asylum seekers in Scotland. Communities, especially in my own region of Central Scotland, are feeling the consequences and tensions are rising. This debate is important because, however difficult, we have a duty to confront the concerns of our constituents. We can't simply dismiss them. In Falkirk, the rape of a 15-year-old girl in October 2023 by an asylum seeker who entered the UK illegally has left the community shaken. As part of the perpetrator's defence, his lawyer mentioned cultural differences and language barriers being part of the reason that he did not understand his action, but did not say that that was an excuse for the crime that was committed. Now, irrespective, for the people that I represent, the plain fact is this: a young girl was attacked by someone who illegally entered the UK. Protests have taken place outside migrant hotels in my region. The use of hotels have become a flashpoint, fuelling anger and disgust. But we can't brand everyone who raises concerns as racists. We, as politicians, must listen. I certainly will.
Minister, briefly.
The crime that you describe is absolutely disgusting and appalling, and I would totally condemn that. And she then goes on to say that people who are raising concerns cannot be tarnished or categorised. But she also accepts that we cannot hold those that are seeking, fleeing from war and persecution, and asylum seekers and refugees with the same brush either, and that we need to be very careful to use our positions of leadership to actually calm those tensions. Can she give me an example of how the Conservatives are doing that?
Megan Gallagher, and give you the time back.
We are trying to have a grown-up debate in the Scottish Parliament this afternoon. The public are not extremists. They're asking fair questions. And what we are trying to do is bring the debate debate here in the Chamber to talk about the wider issues surrounding asylum seeker hotels and indeed the issues that could alleviate some of the tensions, such as housing, which I will get onto in a little while. But one of the banners at the protest, and this is the point I'm going on to, Minister, it read, "Migrants adored, pensioners ignored." That sentiment is completely blunt, but it captures what I believe is how many people are feeling right now in Scotland. Immigration pressures, that's both legal and illegal, expose the failures in housing, healthcare and public services. Too many hard-working people who live and work in Scotland are feeling ignored by governments, and I'm saying that in a plural context, who have completely failed to get a grip on this issue. I think we also need to look at the demographics of who is arriving here in Scotland. Across the UK, 62% of asylum claims are from adult males, compared to just 21% of adult females. For small boat arrivals, the imbalance is even greater. Around 75% are adult men, while only 10% are children. These are not families fleeing together. They are overwhelmingly single men of working age. So people do see this, they do see the demographics, and they wonder why women and children are not being prioritised as part of the asylum system. Meanwhile, here in Scotland, over 1,500 asylum seekers are being housed in hotels, almost a quarter of those in the system. Across the UK, the number of hotels still stands at more than 32,000, despite repeated promises to reduce it. No, I won't, because I'm in my last couple of seconds. Presiding Officer, housing is central to the debate. Scotland's housing emergency wasn't created overnight. It is the product of decades of failure to build enough homes. We see that through the homelessness applications. We see that through the thousands of Scots who are trapped on social waiting lists. Yet asylum seekers are being placed in hotels while local families wait. The solution is straightforward. If we get a grip of the housing emergency, if we build more homes, then we will be able to look at immigration in a new light. But until we get a grip of that situation, Presiding Officer, I fear that we will still have tensions here in Scotland because we're not addressing the big issues that matter in this country.
Thank you. I now call James Dornan to be followed by Douglas Lumsden. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. One of the most noticeable things in my time in this Parliament, and it will be 15 years when I retire next year, no cheering please, is the positioning of British politics. Historically, it would move gently from centre-right to centre-left with a few Thatcher-like blips in the middle. However, there's now been a continual movement in that window, and it moves further and further to the right. The reasons for this? One reason is the constant squealing by media outlets in an attempt to get clicks for advertising. Bad news always sells better than good. But the other is the craven surrender by once mainstream political parties to the racism and xenophobic scaremongering being touted by populist grifters on the make. In 2015, I had the opportunity to visit Serbia with a local charity, the Caring City, to see how efficiently the support that they had sent to help refugees fleeing from war-torn countries was being used. During this trip, I met a group of Afghani families who have been travelling for months to get to Serbia in the next stage of their journey to a hopefully better and more safe life. The father was holding a small bag, which I took to be important items, papers, etc. It was a newborn child. They trekked for thousands of miles with the mother pregnant and then having to give birth and succour that child while living in makeshift tents or simply by the side of the road on their journey. I met many other good people there, forced to leave because of different situations in their country, and many of them were young men because they were the ones that were under threat from their existing governments. The thing is, most of them would have been a huge positive to any country, but out of all the people I spoke to, not one, not a single one was making their way to the UK. As one voluntary worker said to me, why would they? They know the UK hates foreigners and is very unwelcoming to them. That's something to be proud of, eh? Presiding Officer, migrants and refugees are not a curse in a country, but generally a blessing. They often bring with them much-needed experience, different cultures and a vibrancy that is often missing in this grey land of ours. However, to our shame, we now see any new person as a threat to our jobs, our houses, our doctors and our safety. Utter insanity. There have clearly been some high-profile cases of violence and sexual offences that are appalling and have to be dealt with by the full force of the law. But does that mean that everyone from that country is a threat? Of course not. There are many instances of Brits or Scots going abroad and committing heinous offences. Should every Scot or Brit be banned from those countries? Of course not. This debate has been brought about for one reason only. The party that moved it is terrified of losing support and MSPs to a racist grifter in charge of another party. But of course they're not alone. Whilst the Tories meekly trail behind Farage, hoping to entice their support back by even more xenophobic actions such as this motion, Labour have decided to try to outdo them. Apparently barracks are being considered to house asylum seekers. One of the problems raised in this motion, however, is a real one: the cost to Glasgow of housing asylum seekers. But the solution isn't to make life more unbearable for those seeking shelter. The solution is simple. Support the cities that take in asylum seekers with appropriate funding. Allow asylum seekers, as Jamie Green already mentioned, who often bring with them much-needed skills and qualifications to work, which takes some of the strain off the taxpayer and also helps to close the employment gap that we keep hearing about. But of course, none of this works for those in charge because they don't want solutions. They want scapegoats. If it's not asylum seekers, it's single mums with more than 2 kids, or it's the guy down the road that makes a few bob on the side doing homers, whilst also helping his neighbours and community. Meanwhile, the ever-increasing number of billionaires get to decide who the losers are whilst funneling the money offshore, never to be seen again in these islands. Presiding Officer, I'll finish by saying, if you're looking for someone to blame the tax dodgers, blame the mass polluters, blame the utilities that charge us more than anywhere else in the world for power, whilst grabbing huge profits for themselves. But stop blaming people fleeing from a horrible existence over thousands of miles to try and make a better life for themselves and their family. The way the world is going, one day that may well be you or yours. Please vote against this horrible motion.
And I call Douglas Lumsden to be followed by Ben McPherson. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. During recess, there was a protest outside the Asylum Hotel in West Hill, just outside Aberdeen. There were 3 groups: the protest, the counter-protest, and the group at the other side of the road where I was just watching to see what was going on. And regardless of what you think of the protesters, we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of people out there angry at what they see going on over immigration. And let's set this straight right up front. Legal migration is good. Our country is great, and it is the way it is today because of legal, controlled migration. And we owe so much to those who have came to this country and call the United Kingdom their home. And we are in a position that we can control our own borders. We can attract the skills and professions that we need, be that doctors, dentists or nurses, all that we have a shortage of. The problem we have, and what fellow Scots are angry about, is illegal migration. The First Minister likes to remind us that we are a country that follows the rule of law at every opportunity. Yes, I will give way.
Minister, briefly.
Just in the spirit of the fact that language matters, would he accept that there is no such thing as illegal migration due to the 1951 Convention, which this country is signed up to, and he would be better advised to use the language that is appropriate, which would be regular and irregular routes?
Douglas Lumsden.
I think if people are coming here illegally, then it is illegal migration. I think that's the term that everyone accepts. Because when it comes to illegal migration, the government is quite happy to look the other way and welcome with open arms these individuals who have dangerously entered the country illegally. The SNP seem genuinely confused about what is legal and what is illegal. And let me try and spell it out for the members in this chamber. Applying for a visa, being granted the visa, bringing your skills to the UK and contributing to our economy is perfectly legal and welcome. Crossing the channel in a small boat, illegal. Not only that, it's dangerous, life-threatening and enables criminals. We should not be welcoming people into this country that cross the channel illegally. If the SNP can't understand that, then it proves that they are out of touch with communities right across Scotland who are angry. I will give way.
Very briefly, Stephen Kerr.
Okay. I think that's the whole point. I mean, I asked a question last week at GQs about homelessness in Glasgow and pointed out the issues surrounding refugee numbers or asylum seekers, call them what you will. The Minister that was replying said I should be ashamed of myself for asking the question. Isn't that how out of touch the SNP are with the ordinary people of Scotland?
Douglas
they
Lumsden.
Don't share their concerns.
Yeah, no, Douglas Lumsden.
Stephen Kerr is right. You know, whether we like this to talk about this or not, this is real concerns from people outside. And you know, we are here as a Parliament. We have to represent the views of all those people also. You know, there is no real deterrent in this country. The Rwanda scheme, maybe it wasn't perfect, maybe it wasn't liked by everyone, but it would have been a start. But instead, we have Labour and the SNP sending out all the wrong signals. We shouldn't be encouraging illegal immigrants to cross the Channel in dinghies, allegedly fleeing persecution, conflict or danger from war-torn France. We simply cannot cope. The government needs to understand that the strain that communities are under due to high levels of illegal migration. And, you know, Scots struggle to get appointments at dentists, GPs, NHS waiting lists have spiralled out of control. We have a housing emergency and people can't get into social housing. The list of pressure goes on. And Jamie Green's right, these pressures did exist before. But if members in here think that illegal immigration is not playing a part in all of this, then they are deluded. And hard-working families that have paid into the state for their whole lives are being forgotten about. That is the view of people out there. People see that our public services are under strain. Local councils that are already facing a funding crisis due to years of SNP austerity are left to pick up the tab for the SNP's open door policy. The SNP government need to listen to our communities, listen to our hard-working Scots who are angry because they are paying more and getting less. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Ben McPherson to be followed by Paul Sweeney. Up to 4 minutes, Mr McPherson.
When the internet became more prevalent and social media emerged, many of us thought it would help bring us closer together as human beings, both here and around the world. Unfortunately, on many occasions, and we're seeing a lot of this now in our communities, such technology is being used by bad faith actors to drive wedges between communities and create fear. Because fear of immigration has always caused much more damage than any sort of immigration ever could. People think of the bad examples, the minority of stories where there has been a situation or a case that has negatively affected a community and focus on that, rather than amplifying and considering the huge and massively positive contribution that thousands of individuals have made to other countries they've gone to throughout the pages of history and in recent times. And let's also remember that a lot of the people who are coming to our shores and other parts of Europe are moving from places that we bear responsibility for damaging: Iraq, Afghanistan, and many others. And let us think, in the shoes of those who come here, how it must feel to leave somewhere, to travel across continents, and then arrive and be subject to a system that is often extremely difficult for them to cope with, mentally and psychologically. I recognise and respect that immigration is an important issue for my constituents and elsewhere in Scotland. And it's something I've thought about deeply, particularly as MSP for Leith, a port, an area that has welcomed people for decades, whether it was the Irish in the 19th century, Italians, Indians and Pakistanis in the 20th, more recently from Poland and Ukraine and America and China and elsewhere, all of whom have added to our community and also adopted a sense of being proudly Scottish. Let us be clear that the vast majority of people who come here are very positive contributors. That is a fact. Economically, they are net contributors, and socially, they bring something to our communities, creating multicultural and intercultural diversity, with minorities adding to a strong and inclusive collective embrace of Scottish culture. That is what our New Scots do in the vast, vast majority. Now, I'm passionate about the benefits of immigration, as you can probably hear, but I also agree that while people are welcome, of course, we need to have a controlled system. That is not controversial to say. Every country has that. And we, as a party, have always been clear about that. Membership of the European Union and also a points-based system. That was the position in 2014. It is a serious position. And of course, if boats were landing here in Scotland, we would need a system to manage that. But the question, more broadly, is about while it's about the rate and the level of immigration and what that would mean for Scotland, we need to consider thoughtfully and sensitively and rationally, without taboo, about the fact that in Scotland we need to bring more people here. Yep. The fact is we need more working-age people to be here because of our demographics and our low birth rates and they enrich our communities. And I would say that this issue is completely reserved just now, but there are solutions that can be found. And while we continue to consider how Scotland could build a different migration system, let us embrace the tradition, the long tradition, of the warm Scottish welcome with our hearts and shaking hands as people arrive in our communities.
Thank you, Mr Macpherson. We now come to the final speaker in the open debate, Paul Sweeney. Again, up to 4 minutes. Mr Sweeney.
The start of the debate.
So, Mr Sweeney, I think we're having difficulty with your visuals at the moment. Do you want to begin again?
Presiding Officer, apologies for my connection issues. Hopefully you can hear me. I've been listening intently to this debate so far this afternoon, and I agree with speakers that the Conservative motion is not only ignorant in nature, but also deeply divisive and unnecessarily damaging, because it fails even in its title to address the fundamental crux of the problem. People seeking asylum are not the primary issue in relation to housing pressure in Scotland today. It's the rate of conversion from people in the asylum system, rightly caused by a result of the backlog built up by that Conservative government into refugee status and then settling people according to existing housing capacity, which is under pressure. So really, the hypocrisy here, as highlighted by Mr Griffin, my colleague, is appalling. They should be, eating humble pie, actually, for the vandalism they caused to the asylum system over the last few years. And certainly, as someone who represents 95% of people seeking asylum in Scotland, that rings true. The penury that people have been forced to live under in the asylum system is shameful. People surviving on as little as £9 a week is simply unsustainable for many people. They're the most destitute people in our community, and we should be doing as much as possible to get that backlog down. And I support the Labour government's efforts in doing so as quickly as possible. That therefore requires all of government at every level to support that transition from people in the asylum system to settling as refugees with the right to work and contribute to communities and use their talents. That's a good problem for Scotland to have. We need more people as a country. The level of working-age people by the middle of this century is set to increase only by the equivalent of the population of Stirling, but the number of retired people is set to increase by the combined population of Aberdeen and Paisley. So it's not difficult to do the maths. Unless we grow the working-age population of this country, people able to contribute to the workforce, then we're in for a serious fall in living standards or a significant increase in taxation to deal with that issue. So I think it's necessary for us, in terms of our own well-being, to grow this country's overall working-age population and to settle people. And certainly Glasgow is a city that is well able to do that. It was a city built for 1.1 million people. It only currently has around 600,000 people living in it. That's why over 95% of asylum seekers in Scotland are resident in the city, equivalent to around 4,100 people. It's not actually a large number when you consider that there's over 2,000 empty homes long-term in the city at the present time. So clearly it's coming back to an issue of failure of policy in translating housing capacity to meet the demand of a growing population. And that's something that the Scottish Government needs to step up and take responsibility for. It's no good simply saying that the UK Government has to somehow finance refugee accommodation. The responsibility transfers once that refugee status is granted. And I'm open-minded about the idea that the Minister suggested about revisiting the Mears contract. I believe there's a break clause due next year. I would be happy to work with colleagues on exploring a move towards the UK Government about changing the nature of that contract, whether it could be a municipal contract or whether it could be delivered through another means through local housing associations in the city. Therefore, the pound is recycled more readily into housing stock supply in the city. These are things we could look at constructively, but I think the Scottish Government has to recognise that ultimately this is an issue of housing supply. The supply is not meeting demand. We need a growing population, particularly in Glasgow, and we need to address that urgently at all levels. So with 44% of homelessness applications due to come from people who have settled in refugees, it's clear that that needs to be managed efficiently and that needs to be addressed. Certainly, there's an added pressure with regards to people coming into Glasgow from other parts of the UK, and we maybe need to look at temporary applications of local connection rules in order to staunch that flow of people from other parts of the UK. But ultimately, it comes down to growing the housing stock, and it needs to grow at a much faster pace than presently. Otherwise, we're going to see continued social unrest, and I think that's not good for our politics in general. We need to meet the needs of the people through housing supply.
We now move to closing speeches. I call for Patrick Harvey. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to recognise the context for this debate. The UK still receives a small number of refugees compared with many other countries. 72% of refugees live in countries that neighbour their country of origin. And the UK hosts only around 1% of the world's refugees. And the truth is, they make a huge contribution to this country, both economically and socially. As for the numbers, asylum applications peaked in 2002 at around 84,000 a year. In 2024, the number was around 84,000 in the year. Now, the figures so far for 2025 do show a slight increase, still significantly fewer than many other European countries, and the current peak is similar to previous high points. And that's nothing to be surprised at, given the growth in conflict and economic or climate stress around the world. Most claims are legitimate. They are found to deserve and need the right to stay here. And the backlog, as others have mentioned, is entirely the result of deliberate choices by successive governments. As for housing, what broke the UK's housing system is the long-term decline in socially rented housing and its replacement by a rapacious, exploitative private rented sector. Asylum seekers are not to blame for the lack of investment in affordable housing. They're not to blame for landlords hiking rent. They're not to blame for the pressure on our public services. These are the results of choices made by successive UK governments. Now, the explicit hostile environment policy of the UK government began around 2012, and anti-immigrant and racist sentiment peaked with Brexit. But even then, even at that stage, what we're seeing now might have seemed unthinkable. Openly racist, ethno-nationalist ideology is being mainstreamed. Members of Parliament openly discussing mass deportation and questioning whether black and brown people can ever be considered British or English. The UK Shadow Justice Secretary quite content to be photographed in the company of a founder member of Combat 18, a neo-Nazi terror group. And a man who proudly showed the world a Nazi salute is now using the social media platform he bought not only to tolerate explicit far-right racist and conspiracy content, but actively paying people to generate it. And despite years, even decades of evidence from countries right around the world, the political parties that claim the centre ground of UK politics are doing nothing to challenge the profoundly dishonest, racist drifters of the far right. Instead, they are signalling to the electorate that the priorities of people like Farage and Robinson are the right ones. Aping the far right is obviously wrong in principle, but it will also never work. These people already have wall-to-wall media coverage for their hateful agenda, but the current UK government is risking giving them the political power to demolish our human rights, to treat immigrants and asylum seekers as subhuman, all while slashing public services even more severely and handing what's left of the economy to the super-rich. We need to be clear-eyed about the dire threat that's resulted from UK government after government dancing to the far-right's tune and allowing both traditional and social media to become propaganda machines for extremism. I want to end, Presiding Officer, by saying there is still reason for optimism. Even after decades of anti-asylum propaganda, in every community you can find people giving their time, their energy and their resources to support asylum seekers, to show that the instinct to reach out and help those who need it is a basic part of human nature. It is strong. We need governments and politicians who share that instinct, who will express it and who will explicitly challenge and oppose the racism of the far right.
Thank you. I now call Neil Bibby. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have long thought the issue of immigration requires a sensible, mature and informed discussion. There has, of course, been some good contributions and points made during this debate, but sadly, overall and not surprisingly, we have not had the considered and honest discourse that is required for such a serious issue. Not honest and considered either, because, as Mark Griffin and Paul Sweeney said, the Conservative motion reeks of hypocrisy. We know why they held this debate, because they are panicking about reform, and who knows, Mr Hoy might be leading reform in Scotland the next time we debate this issue, the way things are going. The fact is immigration skyrocketed under the Conservatives. They didn't have a plan then, and neither does Nigel Farage now, who is a key Brexiteer, is as responsible as anyone for the situation the country now faces. The UK Labour Government, on the other hand, has doubled the number of asylum decisions and reduced the number of asylum seekers waiting for a decision by 24% in just 12 months. That is practical and responsible action. What won't work is not practical and responsible is the policy of open borders, as suggested by some members of the SNP and Greens, and equally closing the borders, as suggested by some members of Reform and the Conservatives, is not practical or responsible either. I think the vast majority of people in Scotland and indeed the UK would agree with Labour's position that we must have a managed immigration system alongside sustainable public services and finances. Scotland will always be a place where vulnerable people are welcome. It is part of who we are. Always has been. If we lose that, we lose something fundamental about being Scottish. The welcome to everyone wherever you come from. But let's not become misty-eyed about ourselves. Let's be realistic. And the reality is that a large number of us are struggling to make ends meet. Can't afford a home, can't afford public transport, don't feel comfortable with our finances, don't carry ourselves with the confidence we wish. And when those doubts are among us, then people are less charitable. Then we wonder why people from beyond our shores seem to be able to get the things we cannot afford. Let me be clear, Presiding Officer. When my son Sam was born, it was a difficult birth, and there was a United Nations of doctors and nurses around the world in that theatre room in Paisley who brought my son into the world. New Scots have made an invaluable contribution to our NHS and to our society as a whole. The resentment people currently feel about asylum seekers is not because those people are racist. It is because people like the Tories and the SNP have failed to make Scotland as prosperous as it could be. It is because of the beggar thy neighbour politics they peddle. I welcome people in need of refuge. I reject those who pretend to be welcoming but who do not build the nation that welcome them and who look after ourselves. I reject the parody patriotism of John Swinney and the SNP and welcome the challenge to make the Scottish welcome real again. Presiding Officer, we can only do that by recognising the real concerns our constituents have about the levels of migration and the impact this has on their security, our public services and housing supply. People are angry about the lack of homes and the state of their homes. They should be angry about this, but that anger should be directed at this SNP government who created this housing emergency. Cutting the affordable housing budget, cutting money to councils while spending £1 billion on a new Barlinnie prison that should have cost a tenth of the price. People in Scotland need a new direction. That's why a Scottish Labour Government would reform our planning laws and support councils to boost housing building and end the housing emergency, something this Government has failed to do.
Thank you. I discourage members from making interventions from a sedentary position and now call COCAB Stewart Minister up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We have heard this afternoon of the failings of the UK Home Office policies, yet this must not undermine our continuing moral and legal commitment to refugees and people seeking asylum. I am deeply concerned of some of the rhetoric being used across the UK, which of course should have no place in our society. No one should have to fear that they will be targeted just for being who they are, and it is critical that every citizen feels safe and welcome in our communities. As the Cabinet Secretary made clear in her opening remarks, we all have a responsibility to be mindful of the language we use. Scotland's Parliament can choose to reject the deliberate use of divisive and inaccurate language, which does nothing to help to address community concerns or the impact of austerity. And it has been disappointing to hear the echoing of divisive language being uttered in this chamber, said, however, politely, but still inflammatory. Speaking as a local MSP, Glasgow Kelvin, I have the great honour to represent one of the most diverse constituencies in Scotland. And I understand, of course I do, that people feel left behind after a decade of austerity, after a decade of mismanagement. And Westminster is literally working against them. However, I have also had the pleasure of visiting so many local grassroots community groups that are bringing people people together to share conversations, to share food, to share culture and to get to know each other, learning that we actually have more in common than what divides us. And Scots, new Scots, have the same hopes, the same dreams, and their stories and laughter are weaving the very fabric of our rich, diverse, welcoming nation. I will take an intervention.
Briefly, Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful. Does the Minister also recall the way in which a community in another part of Glasgow, at Kenmure Street, rose up in opposition to the violence of the Home Office heavies and protected their asylum-seeking neighbours? Does she share my pride in that kind of concern about the immigration issues in our society?
Minister.
I absolutely accept and acknowledge that the majority of people in Scotland will rise up and protect everyone within our communities. However, in direct contrast, some of the pressures arising from the UK's asylum system are a consequence of overly restrictive policies, such as the right to work, and this prevents people from contributing to our economy or indeed supporting themselves. And it erodes their skills and experiencing, minimising opportunities for integration. And I welcome the fact that that was also raised by Mr Green and Mr Dornan. Now, sadly, and to our increasing frustration, asylum and immigration decisions-making is reserved to the UK Government. And I welcome Mr Sweeney's support to work with us to pursue the right to work and safe, regular routes and the expansion of visas. Presiding Officer, I am deeply concerned that asylum hotels are now being turned into targets of the far right for the safety of all. We need the move-on period to be extended back to 56 days. I'm conscious of my time. Furthermore, local authorities need to be properly funded for the work they do where the pressures are identified, such as the case in Glasgow City Council. And we need the UK Government to recognise the impact on public services and engage with us to develop those solutions. So I hope that the new Home Secretary and Home Office Ministers will engage with the Scottish Government and Scottish local authorities on how we can best deliver asylum and immigration systems that are based in compassion, that are based in respect and that are based on human rights for all.
Thank you. And I now call on Stanley Skulhani to wind up the debate. Up to 6 minutes. Dr Skulhani.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The people of Scotland deserve honesty, and the truth is this: the SNP has failed them. For years, the SNP has pushed an open-door immigration policy so long as someone else is paying for it. They boast of compassion but wash their hands of responsibility. Where will asylum seekers live? Where will their children go to school? How will they see a GP? These are not abstract questions. They are real pressures on communities already stretched to breaking point. And yet, the SNP blunders on while they duck the consequences of their own mismanagement. It's not just incompetence, it's hypocrisy. The SNP can find money to send abroad, yet they cannot build homes here. They find funds for foreign aid projects, but they cannot house Glasgow's homeless. They point the finger at Westminster, while 5 senior officials at SNP-run Glasgow City Councils walked away with over £1 million between them, signed off by themselves, with frontline services being slashed. Furthermore, the Scottish Government has no plan to recover £36 million of benefits overpaid and fraud. That's not generosity, it's greed and misrule. The SNP have built a narrative, not a solution, and our communities are paying the price. Scotland and Scots are generous, but generosity must be matched with realism, and it's time the SNP learnt that lesson. Douglas Lumsden reminded us that legal migration is good. Our country is great. And it's the way that it is today because of legal controlled migration. We owe so much to those who came to this country and called the United Kingdom home, just like my parents did. I am the son of immigrants. Immigrants who arrived, got a job, paid their taxes and integrated in British society. They have never claimed a penny but worked hard for every single day of their life. And yes, I will.
Ben McPherson.
Well, a bit past the point in the speech, but I was keen to hear Mr Gulhani, who I appreciate as a significant contributor himself as a professional. But colleagues in his benches did show some humility, particularly Mr Hoy, about the mistakes of his party and the damage that it's done to our country in terms of the austerity agenda, which of course the Scottish Government has faced the consequences of. I just wondered if you were going to if Mr Gulhani was also going to allude to that.
Dr Gulhani.
I think Ben McPherson has forgotten 18 years of SNP rule has led us to this point. Absolutely, SNP is responsible for where we are today. And I will say, with my colleagues, that the Conservative government were wrong in the way that we handle migration. We have lots of things to learn, and we will show contrition for that. Craig Hoy told us that Susan Aitken, the SNP leader of Glasgow Council, has admitted there was a £66 million budget shortfall, one that is of the SNP's own making. The SNP want to virtual signal on someone else's dime. Megan Gallagher told us 1,500 asylum seekers are being housed in hotels, almost a quarter of all those in the system. In fact, Glasgow is the asylum capital of the UK, with 65 per 100,000, and attracting homeless refugees from other UK cities like Belfast, Birmingham and London. But what does this mean in practice? What does this mean to the average person? Through a lack of planning by this SNP government, people cannot be seen by their GPs. All public services are creaking and they're in danger of failing. Yes, I will.
Minister, briefly.
Thank you. Mr Gulhani mentioned Council Leader Susan Aitken. Her direct quote was actually, "It is not asylum seekers and refugees that are the cause of this problem. It is around policy and lack of funding that flows to local government." She then goes on to say that these are the direct consequences of decisions implemented elsewhere, specifically in Westminster.
Dr Gulhani.
And who funds local authorities, Deputy Presiding Officer? It is the member and her government. Shirley Ann Somerville had no idea how she would shape asylum or indeed pay for it. Mark Griffin condemns us for speaking about an issue that his own constituents in Central Region Scotland are speaking about, and affecting directly my constituents in Glasgow from accessing public services, not international affairs. Jamie Green is right. It is not the fault of the individual asylum seeker, but the fault of this SNP government trying to claim the moral high ground, but they don't know how to pay for their promises, and they are letting our public services crumble. Scots are compassionate people, but without compassion, without capacity, there is chaos. And chaos is exactly what this SNP has delivered. A housing emergency, NHS waiting list spiralling, schools overcrowded and councils financially broken. Scottish families are waiting longer, paying more and getting less under this SNP's undeniable legacy. Controlled, fair and balanced immigration must be the principle, as Ben McPherson articulated. Scots deserve homes, jobs and services before SNP vanity projects and virtue signalling. The SNP's open door past the bill to Westminster policy has failed, and our motion today puts Scots first, demands fairness and demands realism. Scotland cannot afford the SNP's excuses any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on impact of accommodating asylum seekers on Scottish local government. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.